Problem 21.5. Companies U and L are identical in every respect except that U is unlevered while L carries or has 10 million of 5% bonds outstanding. Assume that 1. All of the MM assumptions are met. 2. Both firms are subject to 40% federal plus state tax. 3. EBIT is 2 million. 4. The unlevered cost of equity is 10%. A. What would the MM now estimate for the value of each firm, that is the levered and unlevered? So for the unlevered firm, we know that there's no tax considerations on debt. So we can just simply look at the EBIT of 2 million times 1 minus the respective tax rate divided by the cost of equity, which we saw in part 4 is 10%. So 2 million minus or times 1 minus 0.4, which is 0.6, leaves 1.2 million. Divided by 0.1, we just move the decimal place, so we end up with 12 million as a value for the unlevered firm. The levered firm also has that same 12 million, but there's debt, recall, of 10 million times the 40%. So we pick up an additional 4 million in value through leverage. So we can see the levered firm carries 4 million more in value than the unlevered. For part B, what is the return on stock for firm U and for firm L? The return on stock is already disclosed in part 4 as 10%. We can then use a modification of the Hamado's equation to estimate the levered cost of debt. Notice here we have the return on stock levered is equal to the unlevered plus the return on the stock unlevered minus the rate on debt times 1 minus the tax rate divided by the proportion of debt to equity. We plug in for values, so 10% is the cost of unlevered equity. And we can see that the cost of debt is 5%. Remember up here, 5% bond. We know that 1 minus tax rate is 0.6. And then we know there's 10 million in debt relative to the remaining amount in equity of 6 million. How do we get that? Well, notice up here for the value of the levered firm, we know what? There's a value of 16 million. 16 million minus 10 million in debt leaves 6 million in equity. So the cost of levered equity is 15%. Part C, find for the levered firm the cost, that is the respective amount for stock, and then show that stock levered plus debt is equal to the value of the levered firm. So we kind of already did that in part B, but let's just work through the steps just to re-verify it. So again, we could just plug in EBIT minus the rate on debt, or what we're essentially backing out for here is interest expense. So notice here, we have 10 million in debt at 5%. So some quick math just tells us we're paying $500,000 every year in interest expense. So 2 million minus $500,000 leaves us 1.5 times 0.6 divided by 0.15, we end up with 6 million. We can then plug that back in over here. And so 6 million plus 10 million is equal to 16 million. So we just re-verified our math from part B. Lastly, part D, what is the walk for firm U and for firm L? Well, we already know that the unlevered firm has a cost of equity of 10%. There's no debt, so the walk for the unlevered firm is 10%. Since the levered firm has a cost of debt of 10% and equity costs 15%, we know that the walk is going to range somewhere between 5% and 15%. And since we're using 10 million in debt and only 6 million in equity for the levered firm, we know that the cost of capital will be closer to the 5% than the 15%. So we can just plug values in. Notice 10 million in debt. We know there's 16 million in total value. We see that from part A, and we've reconfirmed it in part C. Times the 5% cost times 1 minus the tax rate plus 6 million in equity times the 15% means we have a cost of capital for the levered firm of 7.5%.